This is Gil Broza. I fell into Agile 20 years ago, and I could not be more grateful that Agile exists and is in my life and turns out to be the best job ever, because I don't know what I would do otherwise.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Jay Hersko. Joined with me, I have fellow coalition member Mike Cadell. Mike, how's it going?
Hey, y'all.
All right. And the topic of this episode, we are going to be talking about the book Agile for Non-Software Teams, a practical guide for your journey. And joining us, we have the author of the book, Gil Broza. Gil, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Ditto. So, Gil, let's start from square one for our listeners that may not be aware of you or know you or may not recognize some of the work you've done. Can we take a minute here to do a little bit of a biographical drop of, where you've been, how you found Agile, and what brings you to us today?
Okay, so I found Agile when I was made manager a little over 20 years ago, and I quickly went to learn how to manage people and how to manage projects and how to use Microsoft projects, because that's what everybody used. And then once I was actually in the role, I realized that I'm not liking most of it. I'm liking the people aspect, the actual work management bit, not quite. So we started getting together daily, sitting down. Nobody thought of standing up, like we're lazy. I met with my product manager and we actually coordinated stuff as opposed to going through my boss, who later actually gave me hell for this and things like that. Then I discovered the thing has a name, and slowly but surely, built it up. For 2 years, I managed a small group that did bioinformatics. So actually used XP for development of software for, scientific research. It was mostly biology and some chemistry. And then I decided I want to, help more people, learn and grow and apply this amazing thing. And so I became a coach at the time when XP coach meant Windows XP. So, or at least, it didn't mean that, right? That's what people thought. Yeah, I mean, still people say, well, you're in computers. Can you fix my stuff, right? I mean, but yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. That one. So, so I can say I've been in Agile for 20 years. I have, coach trained, spoken, for about 16 years. And I've been independent for almost 12. And I couldn't be liking this more.
That is great to hear. That is great to hear. So many people end up in a rut where in somewhere where while it pays the bills, they're not happy with it. And you sound like you are totally happy with where you landed. So God bless you.
Well, yeah. And I used to do a lot of embedded teamwork. And so when I wrote The Human Side of Agile, that really came out of a lot of work with team members and team leaders and managers. But since then, I've been mostly working with management at all levels, including CEOs, depending on the size of the company and the interest. And I find this fascinating and, of course, hard. But that's really where the leverage is, right? We're kind of past the days of guerrilla Agile. So I interact with middle management, executives, stakeholders, business partners, and so on. And I guess this also goes in line with my overall preference to look at the mindset side of the Agile ways of working that we choose, because the mindset does carry over, whereas the tactics, not really so much. Yeah. So that's where I am right now.
So let me ask you this, Gil. You've obviously written a couple of books, which we can go into for I don't think we have enough time on the recording here. But the book that we're here to talk about is Agile for Non-Software Teams, which truly is not a blind spot, but when you look at the Agile practice as a whole, the Agile ecosystem, everybody wants to talk about frameworks, and everybody wants to talk about tools. But there truly is a dearth of people looking to confront the whole fact that this stuff does work if you're not writing software. And yet yours is the first book that was highly recommended to me that actually came across in that specific topic. What led you down that path?
So, I have worked with software groups, departments, product development for so long, right? I was a developer for many, many years, and I'm still fluent in code. To me, a lot of what we have going on in the software side of a company that's kind of an understood problem. I wouldn't quite call it a solved problem, but we kind of know how to access it and what to do there. But a few years ago, let's say 8 years ago, everybody started using the term Agile Transformation, and all of a sudden, Agile got the attention of executives, and they're saying, well, you know what, that's good for business, right? And it can be a competitive advantage, and so on. But then nobody's talking about what those other people do, right? So if you look at the typical company, the actual tech development is usually the minority, right? The pretty small minority, unless you're really heavily into product development. So yeah, like we took care of them, but what about everybody else? So what everybody did was basically take people from other areas of the organization and basically make them product owners, right? Or maybe, speak to them more often because they're stakeholders and so on. But those people also do their own jobs, right? Could they apply Agile concepts to their work? And that was my thing. That's why it's called Agile for non-software teams, right? So it's not, how can you, let's say as a marketing person, can be a product owner for a tech team, okay? That's not so much the problem, and usually it isn't even a problem. But if you have a marketing team of, I don't know, 10, 50, 100 people, and you want to be Agile in marketing, what can you do there? Now, I'm giving marketing because it's the most common non-software example, the other one being HR. But it's everywhere, right? Any business unit can consider that, an Agile way of working can help them turn out better business outcomes. And, we're also talking about healthy human environments along the way, right? So not cogs on the wheel. So that was really the idea. So like this has gotten the attention of, finance teams and ops teams and other totally non-software. Yeah.
And I will admit that I have actually passed this book on to other people I've worked with in transformations who are coming from the business, business and IT. That Venn diagram has been munged, right? But
yes.
There are some people who still do wholly identify as the business side. And I have passed this on to say, hey, you might want to check this out. And digging into the book, right? So one of the things that I took away from the book that I really liked is you use very simple language to explain concepts that if you got the wrong person at happy hour, they would blast your ears off, right? Like, can you imagine? And Mike and I have joked about this, right? Like getting it, landing in an Agile, meet and greet, and you roll up next to some safe fellow, no offense to safe, and then you start saying, hey, what do you actually do? And then the big picture comes out, So like, I thought the way you structured your chapters and some of the insights and Mike, before you joined, I was showing Gil my copy of the book with all my, my flags I have hanging out all over the place. Mike's the same way.
Yeah. The markup. Yes.
and there's a lot of real gems in there, and I don't want to unpack too far into the book because I want people to go buy it. I do want people to go check it out, but I did pick out, if you don't mind, Gil, some of the one-liners you have here, some of the themes that I think are really, to me, as someone who's coached this from the other side, quite resonant. And the first thing, it was early on in the book, but I highlighted this so much I almost went through the page. You have a header which says, it's a question: what does success look like for you, your customers, and your organization? And
yes.
I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about your thoughts on that, because I think that honestly might be the missing link to a lot of what we do, where nobody ever stops to say, well, where are we all marching towards?
Right. And so, people talk about objectives, and sometimes they'll talk about, smart objectives and all of that stuff. That kind of touches on that, right? We might talk about a mission and a vision. We might do chartering, but any element of chartering is, what does success look like? Not just, what is the end goal, right? But how will we know that we got it? And when we're asking the question at the beginning, we get the answer at the beginning and not just at the end, right? So we have an idea for the vision, the goal, the objective. What will be apparent in our environment to tell us that, yeah, we got it? So, sometimes you have lagging indicators and all of that. I don't want to go into that particular discussion, but simply having some discussion as to, what do we mean by that, right? So for just as an example, you mentioned that you wanted people to go and buy the book. Of course, I want people to buy the book as well, right? But what I actually want more than that is for people to read it and to pay attention to it. That's definitely more success. It would be even more successful, and in full disclosure, if some of that turned into, some paid consulting, right? Of course, that might happen for, every one of 100 readers, but that is still a success. So what am I going for? What am I going for in writing a book? What are you guys going for in putting on this amazing podcast? Right? And in choosing the specific people that you choose to interview, right? So it's not just, what's the abstract vision, but also what does it mean to be successful? And what I found is that, in a lot of organizations, they don't even have that conversation. And then it goes kind of by assumption, or sometimes it's just plain implicit. And then people don't see it the same way. And when people don't see it the same way, they work at cross purposes, and then they start arguing about the visible stuff, which is process and tasks and work items, and they can't agree because they are trying to get to different places.
Interesting is, as you said that, there are two thoughts from that I recall from the book that seem like they may link to that. I'm curious your thoughts. At one point, you go into what are you optimizing for as an organization, and then the other thing was, and this is one of those like gems that just really jumped out at me. And I got to give you credit. I've had these same thoughts, but never seen them articulated so well. Is where you talk about the two different types of misalignment.
Yes.
And it just, to me, it all seems to kind of connect together. If you don't know what success looks like, these other things come to play.
Right. Now, I want to touch on this matter of what are we optimizing for. That one is a dynamite question. And I've used it, with so many clients, and it really does give them pause. What we optimize for, you can think of a couple of things to apply that question to. When I use it, I ask about the few things that we are orienting to in the pursuit of our objectives. So we might agree to an objective, and then we agree to, let's say, some success criteria or success measures. That's what we talked about earlier. Then we say, all right, so how will we achieve that? Or what will maximize the likelihood of us getting there successfully? And, if we fall short, that we don't fall too short of the thing. And so that is the question of what are we optimizing for? And that's what I've been referring to as values, right? It's usually work values, sometimes it's human values. So for instance, we might optimize for adaptation as opposed to predictability and getting stuff right the first time, right? We might optimize for collaboration over making people fully loaded, okay? So those imply two very different ways of achieving those objectives, even after we've agreed to the objectives.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. That takes us into the values, beliefs, principles that give rise to practices thing. Which again, I just can't encourage people enough to get this book and dig into that, because it's so clearly stated, and it does such a good job of drawing the connection between the three.
And if people don't want to go as far as the book, on my website, there's a resources page, and you can get a poster that shows this relationship and so on. Because that's the nice thing about this model. And it first came out in my book, The Agile Mindset. I've just upgraded the visual design of it since then. The idea that there actually is a straight line of work between, straight line of thinking between why we do the work and how we get it done, right? So our objectives and purpose, to our tactics, which is, all the visible processes, practices, blah, blah, blah. And what people consistently miss, because it's, abstract and subjective and invisible, is, again, that mindset piece, which is really, what do we optimize for? What's our narrative? What assumptions are we making? If we had to make a decision between two competing things, how would we make that decision? And the answer is not, well, we show up to a demo. It's not like that. Yeah.
I also, bootstrapping on top of that, right? You just talked about, practices and processes and that sort of thing. One of the chapters that, again, I have a side note about here, because I read the whole thing a couple times. You have a chapter which explicitly says, listen to your team's concerns.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I read it and I stopped and I went, it's kind of sad that you need to even make that statement. But at the same time, it is a very powerful statement, because sometimes we get, and it's a human thing, we get too blinded. And the whole idea of, and you talk about it at a couple points where, has Agile been tried before? You know, take the person on the other side of the table, right? And put yourself in their shoes. Have they tried to do a transformation before? What if it only applies to a certain portion? Maybe some of the values may not even apply here. Like that whole thought of thinking is almost, I dare say, counterintuitive, but it just makes total sense.
Well, look, the Agile community can definitely see evidence of having tried to impose this way of working more than they should have, or a lot more than they should have. And but the thing is that a lot of people do this type of imposition or inflicting with totally good intents, right? So I don't want to, discount this in any way. I mean, when I started way back when, yes, this looked so much better than putting together a Gantt chart for something that, I could very well figure out just drawing on a wall or something like that. Or, let's just, talk to people and not just spend forever planning, whatever. But people have choice, people have agency, people have motivation, and so on. So if you are a leader, software or non-software, and, you would like your team to be more agile, approach this from the standpoint of, invitation, purpose. How will it make a difference? How will it make things better? What's broken that we want to change, and so on. But then they will still have concerns. And the concerns are not a knock on Agile, right? The concerns are rarely personal, but the concerns are real. And so if you look at, people in software development, they have a set of concerns. But if you look at people outside of software development, they often have a different set of concerns. Right, and many will tell you, why are we fixing? Nothing is broken, right? Or you're giving us a process that was built and optimized in software development. Yes, you say it's universal, but at the same time, your jargon communicates otherwise. And so, why should this work for us? We don't have product. What's the point of a demo? I don't want to sprint. When I sprint, I run really fast and I get out of breath. I don't want to sprint, okay? But working gradually, incrementally, I get that. Would that be useful for us? Let's talk about that. Maybe it won't.
When you bring that up, I always go back to Craig Larman. At this point, I probably should be paying him royalties because I quote him so much. In his course, he talked about, the whole idea of adaptability, which is really what most large companies and even teams, software and non-software, are trying to get to, right? Can we, in a world of complexity, can we be adaptable enough to still deliver value? And, you made the remark, well, why would I want to change? Because what I'm doing now works. And the most powerful statement he made in that class is he, to me, at least, he said, it's not that what you are doing is wrong. It's because that's a false dichotomy. There is no right or wrong. All we're saying is the way you currently do things are incongruent with the North Star goal. What does success look like? What do we want to be here? And if the North Star truly is to be adaptable,
yes,
well, then we need to think a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Right. And so, going back to what Mike said earlier, that's one of those misalignments, right? You say you want to be adaptive, collaborative, evolutionary, but you don't act that way. And, this is, the situation in well over half of, Agile implementations in software where people, that they talk the Agile talk, but, and they go to the meetings, they go through the motions and all of that stuff, but they still essentially work predictably, right? Very predictably, mostly siloed, mostly trying to get stuff done the first time and just move on, right? So, if the change is to be for real, no matter your line of work, you need to have alignment between what, again, your North Star is, the mindset, what you're optimizing for, and so on, and your actual practices and process and team structure and all of that stuff, right? And one of my messages in the book is that, when you have that type of alignment and when you're honest about what you think will lead to your success, again, those values, your actual implementation might look different from other people's, and that's okay. That is totally okay. You have my permission not to do demos. You have my permission not to do stand-ups. But if you want to be adaptive, you want the team to You want the team to coordinate frequently and think of goals, and you want to get feedback and actually do something with it, and so on, right? How you get them? Well, there's more than one way.
So, Gil, I'm convinced you were listening to the retrospective I just finished facilitating.
Yeah, but you just said it, Gil. Another one-liner that I took out of the book, which was buried in a paragraph. It wasn't even a chapter title or a section title. Your Agile doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And that's a very powerful statement that I think, truth be told, and I may be guilty of this, sometimes us coaches get a little bit too wrapped around that axle.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I can't show anything because, well, I can show you, but the listeners will not see anything. So the way I manage my work and my business. So the business does, courses and book writing and speaking and this and that. So a whole bunch of different activities. When I first started it, hey, I was an XP coach for 8 years. I knew how to roll, right? So I had iterations. I didn't like Scrum that much, so I called them iterations, which was the default Agile term. And I did one every week, and I did a retrospective, all with myself, right? So basically a reflection and improvement. Those iterations were a nightmare. Nothing worked, because when you're in the service business, especially where some weeks you're at a client training and other weeks you're totally in the office doing other stuff, planning them sprint-like, not fun. So something that was more flow-based, and also looking at different types of obligation and managing them differently, what Kanban would call class of service, right? That makes a lot more sense. So I naturally shifted to something that's more Kanban-like. If you look at what my board looks like, 10 out of 10 people would call it a Kanban board because it has stickies on it. But I'm going to tell you, it actually violates a fair bit of Kanban. But it works for me. It works for me in terms of getting flow, in terms of knowing what I have, in terms of reprioritizing without pain, in terms of visibility. And you know what? The board doesn't cover everything. That's such a no-no from a Kanban perspective. You know where the rest of my stuff is? In my calendar. Oh my God. 2 ways to manage your work. Sorry, 2 places to manage your work. But guess what? Process works. Now, I can do this because I do not need to co-plan with other people. Okay. Even when I have clients where there's additional experts on the team, we don't plan those activities together. We just plan the engagement and work through the engagement together. That is managed differently. So, but if I did employ more people who needed to be part of the planning, right? Let's say a little marketing team or an office support team or whatever, that board would go out the window, and I would have to manage totally differently. Okay. Now, and I also want to say again, in full disclosure, I don't want that. I don't want that because that will add more complexity than the thing is worth. So I am simplifying now, but that works with my business model, right? If my business model was that of the small, mid-sized consultancy, I don't know about that. Okay. Right. But I can still serve larger clients with a smaller headquarters.
And you bring up a very valid point where you said, it works for you and you're still able to get done what you need to get done. I think sometimes we get lost in the weeds, the sense of the value still needs to be there. And it's going to be a little bumpy when we figure out how to best maintain the inertia that we have to deliver that value. But as long as the value is still there, we can still put it in the win column, which ties to another one of your chapters, which I absolutely love, where you titled it, Understand that it will be a journey and it will go wrong. Again, putting that in writing, right? Mike, how many times have we had conversations where people just think that, oh, so you're just going to show up and, again, not to knock safe, but you're just going to stand up a couple of arts and we got teams and it's just going to work, right? And you're like, you kind of don't want to dash their hopes. Santa isn't real.
No, I do. Yeah. It's interesting. As you're talking, Jay, and in my mind, I was connecting to I think it may have been that same chapter, but there was a point, Gil, where you described how frameworks are shortcuts that don't have context. and that ultimately don't end up in mindset change. And listening to your description of your own board, it struck me that, how that's taking the good out of the tool and out of the framework, but not being a slave to it. And that theme came through in the book for me quite strongly. And also maybe it's confirmation bias, because that's how I feel and that's how I coach with my clients, to be honest.
And you're in the Agile uprising, but yes.
This is true. This is true.
Well, so in one of my talks, it's actually also in one of my courses, I do this analysis showing how, you can take a practice, and you can take an entire framework for that matter, but a practice will do. If you start applying it, but the mindset is different from the Agile one, right? So it's a different mindset from what gave rise to that practice, then it gets diluted, totally watered down. It confuses people, and it doesn't get you agility. So the canonical example I use, and I use it because everybody has it, is the daily stand-up, right? And when you think about it, the daily stand-up is if you run it with an Agile mindset the way it's supposed to be, right? It basically looks like a conversation. It's micro-planning. As a side effect, it builds the team and all of that good stuff. But only if you run it with the Agile mindset, right? If you do have, in fact, collaboration and transparency and safety, right? People can actually talk about, well, I'm stuck, or I don't know what to do today, or here are my impediments and stuff like that. But what if you apply the exact same practice, like in its documented form? And I know it's less popular these days, but it's been popular for 20 years, right? The 3 questions, the circle, whether it's on Zoom or Teams or in person, but it's a circle, 10, 15 minutes, what did they do yesterday and all of that stuff. And you apply it in a setting where people think otherwise, right? They optimize for predictability. They optimize for, again, getting stuff right the first time, making commitments. And so some of their operational principles have to do with, you work from a plan, you limit the changes to the plan, keep people loaded, all of that stuff. You get a status meeting. And it's the exact same format, right? You get a status meeting, and then, everybody only talks to the Scrum Master and zones out when everybody else is talking. And they hold back on saying what is really an impediment because they don't want to look bad. And, what did they do since yesterday? And you get this litany of nonsense. Like, I went to this meeting and I wrote this document and I sent an email because looking busy is self-preserving. And so, see, that's the exact same documented practice, so to speak. But how you think, again, your mindset, totally changes the dynamics. So you spoke earlier about, getting the good out of the practice, but for a long time, we had no idea what taking the good meant. And so what I've been doing in this book and also the previous one, the mindset book, is actually putting some structure and language around it. Okay, so again, it's values, beliefs, principles. They are fully documented. We don't need to go to this nebulous idea, well, you have to apply the Agile mindset in order to be Agile, but what is this? Well, go look at the manifesto. Well, sorry, it's kind of brief. It's awesome.
That's an understatement. It's kind of brief.
It's a manifest. It's a manifesto, right? So it's meant to be brief, and so really hard to operationalize, okay? But we know what being Agile looks like, okay? Or what being Agile is like. And that's what I've been, documenting here. And so that's really what it boils down to. Okay, and so if you start with a framework, again, it's like, you implement a stand-up and you install Jira or TFS or who cares, and you co-locate everybody pre-pandemic. And instead of writing requirements, you use that template or whatever it is. Going through those motions does not bring about the operational principles that gave rise to them, which are invisible.
It's very cargo culty. I hate to use that term because we've beaten it to death, but it is very cargo culty.
But you know what? Even if it isn't, even if you just look at, what do I get from this? Could this be a viable way forward, right? And let's face it, that's how most organizations went by Agile. Like what I showed you before, and in my talks, I actually showed this with other things, tactics like, the product backlog, pair programming, the Scrum Master, the demo. They don't carry over the mindset. So if you just have the stand up and, you're in this mode of, we work from plans and everybody's a specialist And we kind of work sequentially, right? Like, let's say you're a dev, and then you hand off to the tester who stands next to you and all of that. You do not get out of that the collaboration principle, right? You may not even get the simplicity principle. All you get is that it happens every 24 hours. Okay, so you have to be intentional and deliberate and keep reinforcing that, no, we want this to be collaborative. But if you look at the format, the 3 questions, they do not invite collaboration. They're all I.
No, they're not. You're right.
I was going through the articles on my site just today, and there's an article there from 10 years ago, and it's called Why the 3 Questions Hurt Teamwork. Even then, I was saying this stuff before even I had a name for this whole mindset thing.
Mike Cadell, your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to rewrite the 3 questions using clean language.
I've already moved on from that, and my preferred tactic is to walk the board right to left and talk about what we're delivering and how we as a team can get closer to finishing something today.
I love that. And I recommend it to a lot of teams, and we discuss the merits and so on, and there will always be somebody in the room who is so insistent on the 3 questions that they'll just pull us back. They say, no, it's a best practice. Well, it is so best, you cannot improve on it, right? Even though what you described is basically the Kanban stand-up, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
You mentioned a hot button around any agile practitioners, which is the idea of safety, and creating that environment where people are okay to say what they think. Like you said, I don't need to impress. I don't need to impress who's in the stand up. Here's really what I'm experiencing. Yeah. And there was a term you used, which I thought which I'd like you to go in a little bit further, Gil. Lead intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I work a lot with leaders. Like, that's most of my work. What does it mean to be a leader? Okay, so we don't have a whole week to discuss this, but generally, when you're being a leader, your behaviors influence the environment. Okay, specifically that human system that does work. Call it a team, call it whatever. But your behaviors, what you say, what you don't say, what you reward, what you don't reward, what you incentivize, what you penalize, all of those things. What I find is that a lot of leaders are not intentional about what they want this environment or system to be like, right? So they will support people, and they will coach people, and they will remove impediments and all the good stuff, but not necessarily from a place of clarity and intention and explicit decision of, I want us to be, fill in the blank, collaborative.
X.
Yeah, I want us to be collaborative. I want us to, I don't know what it is, to be adaptive. Okay. Actually, I want to give you an example of where I've seen this. Just the other day, one person wrote to me. He was a developer in one of the teams I coached a couple of years ago, and then he went on and founded a startup. He's now the CTO, and he said, what you taught me there, and I barely spoke to the guy. Okay, what you taught me there,
obviously it worked. Whatever you did say.
Yeah, no. So he said, when we started the company, he has 2 partners. I brought these agile ideas with me. And one of them was that we want we prize effectiveness over efficiency, right? Now, for a startup, that's a really hard choice to make because you want product market fit, but on the other hand, you have a short runway and all of that stuff. But he said, no, that's how we've been running, and the startup's been going on for like a year, 2 years, and it's been going really well and really resonating with people. That is a form of intentional leadership. Okay. Applied to just one thing. I'm sure he applied additional things as well. Okay, but that's the one he mentioned to me.
Even the fact that was verbalized, right? Like that,
yes.
That's even the simple fact that he just put that into words. It resonates with anybody in an organization because you've heard somebody say it.
Yeah.
I think of the same example, talking about leading intentionally, Jorgen Hesselberg and his book, Unlocking Agility. I correspond with Jorgen all the time. Shout out to Jorgen if you're listening. He talked about, there's an example where he was at a company where the head of HR got up talking about the transformation. I'll have to cut that. I'll fix it in post. The dogs are driving me nuts.
Impediments.
But
Yeah.
the head of HR gets up as part of the transformation and says, "You're all going to ask where we're going. I can't tell you because I don't know, and we're going to have to find that together." And not only just the vulnerability, but the confidence to be able to say that. If I'm in that audience, I'm getting up and I'm saying I'm following this person wherever they're going, because they had the stones to stand up and say that. It talk about leading intentionally. It says a lot about their character.
The same company organization really where that developer had met me. I did a lot of work with them on mindset and, really intentional agile leadership. And there was one big planning meeting, like really road mapping. Okay. And road mapping can be agile, depends on how you approach it. Again, with an agile mindset or not.
Sure.
And the person who opened the meeting was the senior director who was in charge of those 150, 200 people. And he said, well, two things. This meeting is yours, so I'm not going to tell you what to do. And the second is we're looking even 5 years down. I don't know what will happen in 5 years, but I can tell you what's always going to be true here. Quality will matter more than schedule.
Wow.
There you go. That's values. Right? I value quality. I value schedule. I do value both, right? And in their organizations, schedule actually does matter, but quality matters more.
What a powerful statement. Again, I mean, I would give my IT to sometimes have a leader stand up and say some things of that nature to at least quasi set the North Star as to which way we're going. Mike, I wanted to ask you, you and I, Mike and I kind of collaborated on the agenda. I basically threw stuff at him and said, this is the things I want to talk about. Mike, do you have any other topics that you want to bring up specifically that I didn't touch on?
A couple things that came to mind. First is just simply a note for listeners. When you get this book and start understanding it, Gil put URLs, links to some online resources. So just a hat tip, Gil, for thinking beyond of the experience, just beyond the printed book. So those are some awesome things. But also, you talk about the organization being ready, and this kind of we touched on this briefly, the concept of psychological safety. And so I'm curious your thoughts on what makes an organization ready for an endeavor such as this, because this is not for the faint of heart.
No, not at all.
Well said.
Yeah. So there are several tips in the book in terms of what you want to be ready with, and I also do mention that even safety, right? You can never have 100% safety, okay? But you can have pretty good safety. You need good enough safety, okay? So that's just one example. You want to get to a point where you're past a certain threshold, okay? In safety, in openness, in motivation, in engagement, things like that. And will you know that you have them? It's sometimes kind of hard to know, to be fair. For instance, for an insider to assess safety, that's not easy, right? It's possible, but a lot of people really struggle with this. A lot of the leaders I speak with, they say, I think this is a safe environment. I do everything I can, but that actually doesn't matter, because what does matter is the perception of the people, right? So, in those cases, I like to, kind of take the pulse of, the team, right? Ask people what's going on. Sometimes it's anonymous. Sometimes it's by observing behaviors. Sometimes it's with interviews. You may want to get even an impartial party. Doesn't have to be an outsider. It can be somebody from, the rest of the organization. Okay. But I think it also goes back to the matter of the objections. Okay.
Yeah.
One point I do make in the book is that you don't want to have a false start. We know that, right? I mean, how many organizations that do software, right, where Agile's been kind of baked for so long, have had false starts? And the problem with the false starts is that they're really hard to, get over, right? And start a second time, right?
It's like, I hate to say it, it's like you start dating someone and it doesn't work out for whatever reason, so you end it, and then there's the kind of feeling that there's something unresolved and we're going to give it another go. Maybe I'm oversharing and it's the only person it's ever happened to. So if I have, apologies. I don't mean to turn this into J therapy hour, but it's kind of, you could understand why there's some reluctance, like the damage that a false start does, right? The poisoning of the well of that argument. It's something you're going to have to try and get over.
It creates change fatigue, and
that too.
It can damage the credibility of the idea.
Yes, and not only that, I mean, once you try again, people will genuinely wonder, so how is it different this time?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, my relationship analogy really is holding here.
No, but the difference is that we're going to be seeing each other for a lot more because we work together, unlike dating.
True.
Right?
True.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
As I say, that kind of connects into another topic in the book that I was small bit that I was curious. You mentioned the satir model,
Right.
and you also mentioned that there's a 2-month minimum where things are going to be chaos for 2 months minimum. I'm curious about that. What's behind that?
Well,
2 heuristic.
months. It exactly, that's the word I was going to use. It's just a heuristic, right? But just based on my experience with standing up so many teams, helping so many organizations, it's never a matter of just a few weeks, even when you get coached, right? It just takes that long. Now, it usually actually takes a lot longer, and I think I mentioned not so much 2 months, or maybe 3 or 6 or 12, depending on the level of support you get, right? Yeah. Because let's face it, if it's the blind leading the blind, it's going to be a really long time. The thing is, and that goes back to the false starts. If you are not fully intentional, explicit, you know what you're doing, right? And people see you're being authentic, you mean it, blah, 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 all of that, then you quickly run out of rope, and that's because of that satir model, right? Because we started some change, we're in the chaos stage of the change. I think that people generally don't want to give it more than 2-3 months before they say, you know what, this is seriously not working. Like, how long should we give it? And what's particularly problematic there is that the way the satir curve works, and assuming that it applies in our case, and I believe it is, again, based on 20 years of Agile, is that the change won't stick just because you give it time. The change will stick because there is a transforming event. Something clicks, a light bulb goes on, right? And so in that grace period, let's say 2-3 months, not 6, something has to materially, click on for people. And, there is, okay, so you guys are the uprising, so I can be blunt, right?
Yes.
There is this oft-repeated fallacy in the Agile community, and it is called shuhari, right? This idea that you go through the motions because the master told you, and thou shalt get it eventually. Don't worry your pretty little head with theory. We'll get to theory. Okay, but for now, here's how it works. Trust us. But the thing is, it cannot work for Agile. It works for driving. It works for maybe, picking up a new instrument. It definitely works in martial arts. But in terms of showing up differently, making different choices, all this adopting a mindset, that is like a different way of being. You don't just get the hang of it. You have to know exactly what you're going into. And, if you only have those cycles, and oh my God, if one more person calls them ceremonies, I'm going to scream. If you only have those cycles, those meetings, and those artifacts, no, you won't get it. And, we already talked about this. The mindset is not obvious in them, other than it's frequent.
If it was obvious, everybody would do it, right? If it was obvious, people would do it. There's a big difference there. I'm Mike and I have multiple conversations about the whole shu-ha-ri thing. We just took a class not too long ago with Peter Merrill. We're in X-Scale. He talks about Mu-Hin Shu, and it's a completely different way of thinking. Yeah. And me and Mike and another one of our friends, Ben, sat there. We went, well, this just makes more sense. I can't just go through the motions and it's just gonna stick. It's not a gradual curve. It's a step change. It's an enlightenment, right? I mean,
yeah. Are you a cook or are you a chef? Right?
Right.
So you can do shuhari for being a cook, Okay, but for a chef, no, it's a different way of looking at stuff.
It
right?
truly is enlightened. It truly is enlightened. Well, Gil, I want to be cognizant of your time and a public apology to Gil.
I don't want this to end.
I
I'm
did not
liking
realize
this.
Gil was coming in from overseas. So it's quite late for him.
No.
But we are definitely going to have you back on. That's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Mike, you had another question before I wrap
just
this up?
there's one other point I wanted to see, Gil, if you could just elaborate on a little bit, and then a pull quote that is just so emblazoned in my brain, going back to my Kanban roots. But there's a place where in the book you talk about how values drive how we engage as human beings, and I keep going back to the values, beliefs, principles connection. But can you talk a bit about how values drive the human engagement aspect?
Well, if you look at the manifesto, what's the first value, right?
Individuals and interaction.
Right, yeah, basically people before process, right? So what does that mean? It means that when we make decisions, which is all the time, right, we look at the interest of people and the effect on people before we look at what the process would say, okay? And that's not just our team, it's everybody, stakeholders, users, whatever. If you truly espouse this value, that shows up in everything that you do. It shows up in how you speak and in what you do, in when there's problems, of course, and especially, when it comes to leadership gets tested in times of trouble. It's what do you gravitate to? Is it what does the process say, right? Or what's the best way, regardless of the people? Or do you look at, what would be right here from a human standpoint? Okay. That's really what it boils down to. Yeah.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking back to years ago, before Agile was a thing. A good friend and mentor of mine told me, he said, Mike, you can tell what somebody values by where they put their time. And it just seems to connect to what you were just saying.
Oh, it totally does, because again, values and beliefs drive our principles, drive our behaviors. So the choices are apparent at each point. Okay. And so what you value is what you pay more attention to. For instance, again, if you value being adaptive, then you would spend time on, getting feedback and questioning your assumptions and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that's brilliantly insightful. The last note I had, this line just stuck with me, and I have to thank you. I've been able to use it with good results a couple of times already with my current client situation. Is the idea of this group of people, call it a team, call it whatever, just help them get to a point where they can finish small, valuable work together.
Yes, that mantra.
That has been so powerful. I can't describe the power in those 5 or 6 words.
Yeah, unfortunately, the acronym is unpronounceable. But yeah, it's finish small, valuable work together. That's it. Yeah, really, seriously, don't sweat the process. Yeah, you do need to get some data on it and improve it, but for now, start just building, good habits around finishing valuable, small work together. That's it.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant, and
it really is just that. But however, there is a lot of money to be made skipping that in lieu of walking in the door, putting a giant framework on people, telling them they're going to use this tool, blah 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 blah, and yet here we are. Yeah. And whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, I think if you've been listening to our show for more than, say, I don't know, 1 episode, you know that we all don't like that approach. But there is, I won't begrudge anybody trying to put food on their table. So, Gil, listeners want to find out more. They want to follow you. They want to track you down. They got a question. They maybe want to engage you. Where can they find you?
The easiest place these days is LinkedIn, isn't it? So I would love it if people connect with me, and please put a note in the message. So do it from a desktop, not from your phone, because the phone just skips the message bit. So I know that you came from the uprising, where I was, even more, transparent and occasionally blunt than I usually am. I would love that. I mean, people can go to my website as well, right? 3pvantage.com. There's, a bunch of free resources and all of that stuff. But yeah, seriously, reach out. We'll have a conversation over LinkedIn. I'd love to help.
Awesome. And for our listeners, I will have links to Gil's website, Gil's LinkedIn page, the book, all in the show notes. You're free to dive in more. So on behalf of Mike and myself, Gil, I want to thank you very much for taking time out to speak with us. On behalf of Gil, Mike, and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning in once again. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a minute, give us a review or a rating, except if it's a bad one, on Stitcher, Apple, Audible, Spotify, your podcast platform of choice. Believe it or not, it truly does help. I want to remind all of our listeners that we also have a very, very vibrant Discord community. It's not just Discord, not just for video games. Amazon owes me money for that. But we have a very, very vibrant community there where there are coaches, scrum masters, product owners, tech guys, all just bouncing ideas around each other and having the conversation keep going. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, of course, there is a Patreon out there. We are committed to doing this free. But if you like what you hear and you want to get involved, feel free to throw us $1 or $2 here and there. You will more than likely get a surprise in the mail from me. The last shipment, I think, just went out. We have a whole bunch of stickers and keychains and pins and a whole bunch of swag. And hot off the presses, we are redoing the logo. So this may be collector's item stuff we're talking about here. You get the one with the old logo. So once again, Gil, I want to thank you very much. Mike, I want to thank you for your time. And until next episode, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast signing out. Just wear a mask.